Well, this morning we're going to talk about transforming the mind. And to kind of introduce this summer, the George Barna Group did a survey on the moral and ethical choices and standards of teens and young adults across America. And I wanted to share some really startling results with you. So let's go right away with the first one, stealing. Just think of a percentage in your mind for your average American teen or young adult. What percentage of that age group thinks stealing is always wrong? All right, I'm not sure that's good news or bad news. 88%. I hope the 12% that didn't think so never come and work at my house for anything or serve me at some store. But okay, 88% stealing, that's one of the biggies. What's the next one? Lying. Ooh. That means 29% of the teens in your life are okay with lying. 29% of the young adults in your life are okay with not telling the truth. Well, what about this biggie? We're going right down the 10 Commandments here, not recycling. Now, the study was designed to really examine teens and young adults' morals and ethics when it comes to pornography. So he threw a bunch of things in there just to kind of give us some comparison. So here we go. Not recycling, one of the cardinal sins of today. 56% of teens and young adults say that is always a bad thing. Let's keep going. Watching sexually explicit TV and movies. Any guesses? Don't say them out loud, just think them. Started with a biggie, stealing, lying, top 3, not recycling. See any problems there? That means that over 2 times the number of young adults and teens that think watching sexually explicit movies and television, over 2 times that think that's wrong, think not bringing your milk carton and putting it in the orange bin is wrong. Where'd that come from? You know where that came from? That didn't come from something overnight. That came from a series of ideas that people catch like viruses over time. And they caught the idea that not recycling is a really bad sin, although we don't use that word anymore, is morally wrong. From movies like Noah with Russell Crowe that took just enough biblical truth to twist it and capture hearts and minds to realize that that story was actually about mankind not stewarding the earth. That's why we get this kind of statistic. I don't know if you've ever heard children's songs by Joe Scruggs. Those of you that have kids my age would have seen your kids that are now maybe 20 or 24 years old grow up on Joe Scruggs. And he's got a lot of songs about recycling, but not one about avoiding sexually explicit TV and movies. So the point is that our children, who are now teens and young adults, are the logical end product of the ideas they've been exposed to. And it's not that there's a preponderance of sexually explicit material at their fingertips. That's not the cause of this moral declaration. It's an evidence of deeper thought processes and foundational concepts that teens and young adults have just swallowed. Now, why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because today we focus on Smithtown Christian School. We focus on giving our kids a distinctively Christian worldview-based education. And I hope to expose some things maybe in your own thinking this morning that would wake you up in some area to say, wow, Lord, search my heart and search my mind. See if there be any wicked way in me or a thought process that isn't of you. And Lord, renew or change my mind. You see, it's what you don't see that'll kill you. Ideas that promote things like this are kind of like carbon monoxide. By the time you realize it, it's too late. And it points to the need to have a really well thought out, biblically based worldview. You know, in the last half of the 20th century, philosopher David Nagle teaches at Baptist Theological Seminary says that one of the greatest advances of Christianity in the last part of the 20th century was this, that we came to see Christianity as a comprehensive worldview instead of a collection of bits and pieces of beliefs and actions. I had that same experience, actually, in the last half of the 20th century, not only because I was born then, but I got in just by the skin of my teeth. I remember it distinctly in 1999. I was camp pastor at a camp in Pennsylvania. I was prepping. I had some free time, and I was prepping for a series I was doing in our church on the Sermon on the Mount. And when I was first studying it, I was approaching it in the bits and pieces mentality, looking for the do's and don'ts, the concepts and ideas that people needed to understand. And as I was studying it, it was like a revelation. It really was, where God showed my heart and my mind. Christianity is not a list of do's and don'ts and bits and pieces. It's a way of looking at life based on the way things really are. So when it says, blessed are the merciful, it's not saying make yourself be merciful. It's teaching a principle that says those who are merciful will be blessed. It's a concept, it's an underlying thought or idea that should then well up in actions in our lives practically automatically. You see, if you knew the person next to you, knew the ideas, convictions, and habits of their thoughts and their heart, you could predict their behavior quite well. We're talking about worldview this morning. The concept of worldview first came through German philosopher Immanuel Kant in the 18th century. And what he called worldview was this, which is a real tongue twister, but work with me this morning and say it together. All right, ready? On the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Super sensible substrate. I hope I've piqued your interest a little bit to say, what in the world is that? I've never heard of it. Well, in geology, a substrate is the stuff underneath what you see on the surface. Super sensible meaning it goes beyond our senses. We can't immediately see somebody's worldview. It's beneath the surface. So here we have a diagram of a substrate and different levels of substrate, and here's a great definition from geology class or earth science. The substrate is the surface or material on or from which an organism lives, grows, or obtains its nourishment. So in a way of speaking, our substrate in our spiritual lives or our personhood, the substrate of our lives, is that underlying network of ideas, convictions, and habits that you really can't see, but that drive all of our behavior, all of our speech, all of our attitudes. It's really your worldview. So what is a worldview? Here's a simple definition. It's a foundational pattern of ideas, convictions, and habits upon which a person's life is built. Maybe this picture helps you. Iceberg floating on the ocean. The iceberg above the water is really just the what? Tip of the iceberg. You know, we say that all the time. But this is what it looks like. What you see in a person's behavior is just the tip of the iceberg. Where it all comes from is what's beneath the surface, the worldview. So if you're perplexed by the way certain people act, if you're perplexed by the way you act sometimes, follow the genealogy of your actions back to a belief, a conviction, an idea, or a habit, and you're getting to the place where you start realizing that my worldview, that unseen core of my being, is what causes me to say things the way I do things the way I do, and respond to things the way that I do. Now, how do we get worldviews? Most people catch them similar to colds. They just pick them up by life experience, by your families. Let me just give you one quick example of that. I was at a dinner recently with a guy I was talking to him, a young adult, just wanted to learn about him and found out he's a chef. And I said, so what's the biggest challenge being a chef today? He said, pepper. Not exactly what I expected him to say. So I pressed a little more. I said, what are you talking about, pepper? He said, my boss, the head chef, hates pepper. So to him, there's not a single recipe that can include pepper. And I love pepper. Now, where's this going? So I asked him, why pepper? He said, I have no idea. He just hates pepper. You know what we did? We kind of hypothesized perhaps why this guy hates pepper. And I bet at one time as a young chef, he put too much pepper in something and heard it from his boss. And after that, he said, you know what? I will never put too much pepper in a meal again. And eventually that translated over time, that core conviction That idea that people don't like pepper translated into part of his cheffery worldview that says nobody likes pepper. Now, that's a little facetious example. It is true, but it's facetious. What about you? Maybe something more significant than pepper. All people are like fill in the blank. Where'd that come from? We catch our internal ideas, convictions, and habits many times like a virus. We don't even realize what's driving us or what lurks below the surface of our lives. Well, worldviews answer a series of questions, and there are many different versions of these questions depending on the authors you read. Here's the simplest questions I could come up with, and let me tell you why I'm giving you these. If you're a good parent, if you're a good Christian, if you're a good grandparent, if you're a good teacher, if you're just a good disciple of Jesus, you should not watch anything, listen to any political figure, not do anything without questioning the worldview that's driving what they're saying. And by the way, P.S., this particular presidential election gives you plenty of fodder for worldview examination. Take some of the phrases you've heard in the political process and just trace it back and you'll find what their worldview is. A common one that we hear from one particular candidate who shall remain nameless is the concept of survival of the fittest, right? So you can tell why he says a lot of what he says. You can go back and see what lurks beneath the surface. But here are some questions I would encourage you to ask. Number one, what am I? And this question is really simple. It's what is the basic nature of humans? So here, are you the product of goo and the zoo leading up to you? That's a worldview question. Or are you the product of a special, ordained creation of God made in the image of the one who goes before and stands behind and stands by the side? That really changes how you live your life. As you watch a movie, I would encourage you to sit around the table with your kids and say, hey, we just went and saw the new Star Wars movie. What does the new Star Wars movie say about the essential nature of man? Kind. Think about it as you read books, et cetera, as you watch the political process. Who am I? My identity. This is a big one now because you can have any identity you want nowadays. You know, we were all fearing transgenderism. I'm really scared of transspeciesism. And we laugh, but it's in the news. Who am I? What is my essential identity? And how did I get that? This is a worldview question. Where am I? Can you get what I'm doing here? What, who, where? See, these are easy to memorize. You all probably have them memorized from English class from when you were a kid in school, so you can use these anywhere. Where am I? And that question is, what is my place in the flow of history? Where do I fit in? Where does America right now fit into the big picture flow of God's perspective on history? Why am I? Why are you? Why are you here? What's your purpose? Where are you going? What's the end result of your life? Why am I? And how am I? This question relates to how do you make choices about what's right or wrong? How do you decide whether recycling is bad or viewing explicit television shows is bad? How do you make that decision? On what basis are your ethics and moral choices made? These are worldview questions. But really, these can all be summed up by one big philosophical question: what is real? And I'd love to spend some time thinking about ultimate reality, but most people think they don't think about ultimate reality. But I could almost guarantee that every one of you every day thinks about ultimate reality. Maybe not in the big terms of the philosopher, but parents, every time you hear a ruckus in your children's room and you go in and you ask this question, what's going on here? You're really saying, what is real? When you drive your car because it's making clunky sounds to the mechanic or have the plumber come to your house to fix something that you can't figure out, you're really saying, what is really going on here? We all ask this question every day. And that's essentially a worldview question. We're going to look at a few worldviews today and unpack that concept of what is real. But first, I want to jump to the end of the message to give you your marching orders after today, what I believe God would have us to do. And it's to respond to Isaiah chapter 44. In this section of Scripture, God has inspired the prophet Isaiah to begin poking and prodding and pushing at the stupidity of idolatry. You ever think about how stupid idolatry is from a logical perspective? Here you create something with it. You go chop down some wood, and half of it you use to warm yourself by the fire or bake bread, and the other half you set up as an idol, you nail it down so it doesn't fall off, and you bow down to it. I mean, is there anything more foolish than that? Well, Isaiah is poking and prodding almost with a strong degree of irony at the Israelites' worldview and concepts that they had picked up from the surrounding culture, likely without even realizing they had done it. Listen to this. He says, no one considers in his heart, and there's your instructions, by the way. After today, your instructions, your assignment, consider in your heart. Think deeply about what you think deeply about. But here, no one considers in his heart, nor is there knowledge or understanding to say, I burned half of it in the fire. Yes, I've also baked bread on its coals. I've roasted meat and eaten it. Shall I then make the rest of it an abomination? Shall I fall down before a block of wood? Isaiah goes on to say, this person feeds on ashes. A deceived heart has turned him aside, and he cannot deliver his soul, nor say, is there not a lie in my right hand? Now, why did Isaiah not say, is there not a lie in his hands? Interesting, the way he's unpacking this for us today, and originally for the people of Israel, was that they had two things in their hands. On the one hand, they had a piece of wood that they were going to use in the fire, so that was true, that was right, that was real. And on the other hand, they had created a lie. And it speaks to this human tendency to take reality and, in one hand, carry truth. And yeah, this is what I use to burn, to bake my bread. And yet, in the other hand, we carry a lie, and we just walk around carrying truth and a lie in both hands. And the human tendency is not to just look down and see what's in our hands for today, our purposes, what's in our worldview. What's beneath the surface of your life, there's probably a lot of truth, but you know what? There could be some lies, too, that you've picked up along the way, like a virus. And the Lord wants us to examine that. Today, there's 6 dominant worldviews in American culture. And there's many more different permutations of those. We don't have time for all of them. I just want to hit quickly on 6 so that you can be a little bit better equipped to think about what you think about and to think about what you hear in media, in education, in the public arena, by just looking at the dominant worldviews below the surface of our lives that are driving people. And the first one is secularism. Now, worldviews answer those questions of who, what, where, when, and why, and how, but they also answer a very important question of what is wrong with the world. Do you know even the most optimistic pagans believe there's something wrong with the world? I mean, I don't think there's anyone that looks at natural disasters, babies dying of disease, husbands and wives breaking up, wars, rumors of wars, and says, this world is exactly the way it should be. Nobody does, not even the most optimistic among us. Not even Christians should be saying that. But rather, we say there's something wrong. And each worldview offers an answer to why things are the way they are in the world. Secularism is the concept that belief in God is the problem. If we could just get rid of the superstitious belief in God, this society could really make some progress. We could have some serious scientific advances if we would get rid of that superstitious belief in God. There's a funny, not so funny, but clever meme that I pulled off of Facebook here, which really states what secularism is all about. Yeah, you pray for me, and I'll think for you. The implicit message here, by the way, is if you pray, you're not thinking. And that's really the spirit of the age in secularism. Where does this dominate? What areas of society does this dominate in our culture today? Science and ethics. You know, there was a time 300-500 years ago where you couldn't even call yourself a scientist unless you believed in the Creator God. Now, you better not hint that you might believe that because you'll be ostracized from the scientific world. It's because of the worldview of secularism that says belief in God is the problem. Islam. The problem that Islam diagnoses the world with is that we're all in rebellion to Allah. You see, all humans are born a Muslim, according to Islamic worldview. And so all of life is the story of the struggle to get people back to Allah because we're all living in rebellion. And we do that, or Muslims do that, through jihad and through the imposition of Sharia law to get everybody back right with Allah. Where does this dominate? This dominates in our current geopolitical crises, doesn't it? And boy, did that happen fast. I remember the first time I even heard the concept of Islam. Back when I was a kid, growing up in Huntington Assembly of God, every Christmas, one of our things was to go into New York City as a youth group, take the train in, and just do youth groupy things in New York City, go see the tree. And I remember seeing a guy with a funny hat and from a different culture of mine trying to promote things on the street corner. And I said to a buddy, "What's he doing? I've never seen that." He said, "Oh, he's a Muslim." You know what I said at 16 or 17 years old? "What's that?" 30 years ago, I didn't even know what a Muslim was. And today, the worldview that drives the action of a huge swath of the population is driven and is overtaking geopolitical concerns that we have today, all because of ideas. Marxism. I thought that was dead. I thought communism was over when the Iron Curtain fell, when Reagan said, "Tear down this wall." Wasn't that the end of Marxism? Do you know that surveys show that over 50% of professors in secular universities and colleges are devoted Marxists? Now, what does that mean? Well, here's from the Communist Manifesto from Karl Marx. He says, "Communists openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. The working class have nothing to lose but their chains. Proletariat, unite." The problem to the Marxist is the wealthy. If we would just take all the power that wealthy people have, as represented by their money, and redistribute it to everyone else, everything will be okay. That's the solution to the problems in the world. I'd say this is regaining tremendous dominance in current American politics. And you can fill in the blanks there, not too hard. There are some outlandish ideas being promoted by candidates today, and we're just okay with them because Marxism still has a tremendous hold in the depths of people's hearts. And if your kid goes to a secular university, over half the professors they're going to be sitting with are saying the same thing as this. Very sobering. New spiritualities, Star Wars. Not believing that we are God is the problem. And you can't read this one, but this is a really funny little meme that says, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." Now, we chuckle, but this belief system, this series or pattern of ideas, convictions, and habits is driving millions of people. Pop psychology is dominated by it, and the entertainment industry. Did you notice if you saw the new Star Wars movie, the overt religious statements made in that movie about the Force more than any other Star Wars movie? It's because this concept of the whole ocean being in you, which is really divinity, is in you, is driving our pop culture. Postmodernism is the belief in objective truth is the problem with our world. And this one really gets confusing. This gentleman here, Joss Whedon, is the director and the writer for the Avengers franchise. Probably a pretty wealthy guy. And here's what he says. All worthy work, and he's talking about art right now, but all worthy work is open to interpretations the author did not intend. Art isn't your pet, it's your kid. It grows up and talks back to you. Postmodernism says there is no such thing as objective reality. And what that means, very simply, is that if there's something that occurs, the only reality is in your personal interpretation of that thing that occurred. There's no set God-eyed or God-sized view of any situation. It's just what you bring to the table and however you choose to interpret it. This dominates in art and education in our culture today. Now, it would be great if it stayed in art. You know, we can handle some weirdness in art, right? But what happens when you replace a couple words in here? What if you say, instead of all worthy work is open to interpretation, what if you say all records of history are open to interpretation? that the author never meant? What if you say the Constitution is open to interpretations the original authors did not intend because it's a living thing? It's not your pet, it's a child. It grows up and talks back to you. But even more dangerous and more virus-like is what's infiltrated the church. What about all Scripture is open to interpretations the author did not intend? You say, that would never happen in our time. Well, it's too late. If you think that, it's too late. You missed the boat. The argument in the church about same-sex marriage is built precisely on this worldview issue. That Scripture is open to current interpretations, current, fresh, and more knowledgeable interpretations than what the authors ever intended. This is right inside the church, and it dominates art and education. I want to give you two quick examples of education, because this is SCS Sunday, and I happen to be very passionate about distinctively Christian education, whether you find it in a Christian school or in a homeschool. Here's what our kids are learning today. This book here, I, Rigoberta Menchú, was written by a woman in the late 80s, and she documented the horrendous, horrific treatment of her family by the Guatemalan dictatorship and the government of Guatemala. Her brother particularly was a Marxist, that comes up again, but he was a Marxist revolutionary in Guatemala. And she took great pains to write a biography of her brother and his community and the tremendous oppression, including the brutal death of her brother. She won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1992, and this is a textbook for many, many, many sociology classes in secular universities. Well, one professor decided, upon reviewing this book, I don't know how he got the finances or the time to do it, but he decided to go to Guatemala and verify her story. So he went to the exact town she wrote about. He interviewed dozens of people, looked at their records, their newspapers. You know what he found? It never happened. So what happens with academic dishonesty in school? You usually get a 0. Here at SCS, if you're convicted, so to speak, of academic honesty, you get a 0. You have to write a paper that explains God's perspective on honesty, et cetera, et cetera. It's really frowned upon. Here's what one professor said, who continues to use this textbook in his class. Whether her book is true or not, I really don't care. We should teach our students about the brutality of the Guatemalan government. In one hand is the truth. Yes, if there's a brutal dictatorship, we should teach our students about it. But on the other hand is a lie. And we're okay with that. We can hold two conflicting things to be true, and we're okay. This is what dominates in education. Here's another one that is hot off the presses. Nancy Pelosi recently was scolded by NARAL, which is the most aggressive pro-abortion lobbying group in America, a budget of $9 million that they just pour into candidates who are pro-abortion. Well, Nancy Pelosi made the terrible mistake, in NARAL's view, of using conservative language as she was talking about abortion. And she used two phrases in particular, abortion on demand and abortion as birth control. She used those phrases. She wasn't advocating pro-life position at all, but she just used the wrong words. So here's what NARAL said in response. This was their published statement rebuking Nancy Pelosi. They said, "We don't actually know women who demand abortion or use abortion as birth control. What we do know are women who make thoughtful decisions about how and if they want to start a family and who need access to all reproductive health care services, including abortion." Aren't those two the same thing? Quickly, Christianity, we understand that sin is the problem. And what is the answer? The answer comes in 5 words that sum up the entire Christian worldview. I encourage you to memorize. Started with creation where all was good, went to corruption when man fell into sin. The covenant led to the cross of Jesus Christ, who provided the way for us to approach consummation, which would be consummation of the ages when all things are brought together under Jesus Christ. That's the biblical worldview. And every question about who you are, what you are, where you are, why you are, and how you are, find their answer here. And my challenge to you is to pray with me this morning as we close. and to pray this prayer that would really come in response to Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Do some new digging up of your substrate. Find the lies that you've put in one hand, replace them with truth. And here's the prayer as Pastor Matt comes. Lord, may I see things as you see them. May my eyes be trained to see as you do and to interpret things the way you do. May the meaning I attach to my life experiences be fully shaped by your word. I hunger for more. Transform my mind.